Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. We are living in unprecedented times where we are staring at a global recession and even a depression in the worst case scenario. Once the shutdowns are lifted, the focus of all the governments would be to take measures to reverse the economic damage caused by these shutdowns. These measures will be touted as temporary and would be purported to relieve the pain of the worst affected classes. On the face of it, they may look necessary and may even seem to work, but once you dig deeper, you will discover the disastrous consequences of these measures, which are influenced by economic fallacies on the society as a whole. These consequences have an impact on each and every one of us. Some of us would be very badly affected by it, and some of us will do okay, but none of us are immune to it. Hence, it is important to understand the consequences of various government policies that may be enacted to fight with the impending economic crisis on you as an individual, as a consumer, as an employee, as an entrepreneur, and as a taxpayer, and take action to protect yourself against the adverse consequences of these governmental policies. Economics in one lesson just helps us to do that. With that, let's dive in. This book was written by Henry Hazlitt and was originally published in the year 1946, but the learnings from it are relevant even today. This book is merely an introduction to economics and was written specifically for the beginner. It provides an analysis of economic fallacies that are widely prevalent across the globe. Economic policies of every major government in the world right now are influenced, if not almost wholly determined, by the acceptance of some of these fallacies. This book revolves around economic fallacies, so we must ask ourselves, what is the root cause of this flawed thinking? Why is economics haunted by more fallacies than any other study known to the mankind? If we take any scientific discipline, let's say physics or mathematics or even medicine, each of them has its own complexities. But the complexities of economics principles are multiplied, manifold, because of the selfish self-interest. Every group has certain economic interest. Some of them are identical with those of other groups. For example, everyone wishes to live in a clean environment. But every group also has, and as we shall see, interests which conflict with those of other groups. For example, interest of environmentalists calling for reduction in the use of fossil fuel and oil is in direct conflict with the interest of oil industry and its workers, who earn money from the oil business. While certain public policies would benefit everyone in the long run, for example, education, better healthcare, other policies would benefit one group at the expense of other. For example, higher wages for healthcare workers are beneficial for them, but they increase the cost of healthcare for everyone else. The group that would benefit by such policies has a direct interest in them, and they will argue for them plausibly and persistently. They will even hire the best minds the money can buy to devote whole of their time to presenting their case, and they will finally either convince the general public that their case is sound or confuse them to such an extent that the clear thinking on subject becomes next to impossible. In addition to self-interest, there is a second factor that gives birth to new economic fallacies every day. That is the persistent tendency of human beings to only see the immediate effects of a given policy or its effect only on a special group, and to neglect the long run effects of that policy on this, not only on the special group but on all the groups. It is the fallacy of overlooking second order consequences of action. Thus, the whole of economics can be reduced to a single lesson, and that lesson can be reduced to a single sentence. That is, the art of economics consists in looking not merely at the immediate but at the longer effects of any act or policy. It consists in tracing the consequences of that policy not merely for one group but for all the groups. 90% of bad economic policies result from either one of the two central fallacies or both. That is, looking only at the immediate consequences of an act or a proposal, and that of looking at consequences only for a particular group to the neglect of all other groups. Now that we have learned how to avoid faulty thinking in analyzing economic policies, let's apply our learning to a most common problem that we are currently experiencing throughout the world, which is shortage of face masks. Now, all of us have been told that face masks are important because they help to prevent and slow the spread of COVID-19. This has created an unprecedented demand for masks across the globe. Obviously, the production of masks has not been able to keep up with this unprecedented demand, and we are hearing about a lot of instances of shortage of masks and of people paying exorbitant prices to get supply of masks. Many of the governments have taken measures to reduce the shortages, including ban on exports, price control orders, and rationing, so that masks can be made available at affordable prices for everyone. Despite these measures, there has been a huge shortage of masks, and it does not seem that the problem will be solved anytime soon. Here, we will try to answer the question why price control is ineffective and why does it always leads to increasing rather than reducing the shortage of price control goods. But before we analyze the price controls, we must first understand how pricing system works. For that, let's take example of Bob. Our friend Bob runs a grocery store in the small town of Alphaville. Alphaville grows variety of vegetables except potatoes. The residents are aware about potatoes and desire to consume it, but no one supplies potatoes in Alphaville. Bob sees this as a great business opportunity to meet the demand of potatoes for residents of Alphaville, but he does not know what the actual demand is. He does not know how much potatoes will be sufficient to meet the demands of the residents and what price he should charge for it. After thinking for some time, he decides to follow a trial and error approach. He decides that he has $1,000 to spare for this experiment. He will go to the nearby town and buy as many potatoes as he can for $1,000 and mark up the prices by 20% to arrive at the selling price. He manages to procure 100 kilograms of potatoes at a price of 10 per kilogram. He comes back to Alphaville and puts the potatoes on sale for $12 per kilogram. Since potatoes are a novelty for the residents of Alphaville, as soon as the news arrives, they rush to Bob's store and his entire stock of potatoes is emptied in an hour. Bob is obviously delighted by the response and he decides to make a trip again. And this time he decides to set aside $10,000 for purchase of potatoes. This time around, he manages to procure 625 kilograms, but only at a price of 16 per kilogram. He decides to increase the markup to 50%. This time as well, consumers arrive enthusiastically to get their hands on potatoes, but consumers are buying lesser quantity as the price has more than doubled. But nevertheless, it is still a novelty for most of the consumers. So Bob still manages to sell out his entire stock of potatoes, but this time it takes him about a week. Bob is delighted and he decides to continue supplying the potatoes. Looking at success of Bob, Alice also wants to get into the potato business. She also decides to invest her own money and to engage in procurement and supply of potatoes. The table shows trading history of potato in Alphaville. The economic problem that we are looking at is not merely a problem of allocating resources and products, but more accurately, the problem is of allocating them using knowledge that is not available in its entirety with any single individual or entity. Bob does not know the exact demand for potatoes in Alphaville. He only has the knowledge of his own economic conditions, that is, how much resources he can invest to engage in the potato trade, and what is his own cost of production. Thus, the economic knowledge of conditions of production, the relative availability and abundance of factors of production, and the preferences of individual is not an objective knowledge that can be fully known to a single person or entity. Rather, the knowledge of economic conditions is by its very nature distributed and situated with people concerned by their own individual decision. Hence, to solve this problem, we need only one data point, that is, price of potatoes. When consumer sees the price of potatoes, he can instantly decide how much he wants to buy to satisfy his demand for potatoes. Similarly, once the price is known, it becomes very easy even for Bob to decide if he should engage in the supply of potatoes and how much should he supply. Thus, the prices are knowledge and the signals that communicate information. Each individual decision maker is only able to carry out his or her own decision by examining the prices of goods involved, which carry with them distillation of all market conditions and realities into one actionable variable, that is, the price. In turn, each individual decision will play a role in shaping the price. Consumers, by making their purchase decision, influence the price. Suppliers do so by determining the supply price. Thus, in free markets, the prices are determined by an interaction of demand and supply. No government or bureaucratic institution can act as a substitute for prices determined in free markets because no single person or entity has the entirety of knowledge necessary to set prices efficiently. Now that we understand the price system, how the price system works, let's see what happens when government disrupts this free market price setting mechanism by imposing price controls. We must understand that as an individual, as a business, and as a society as a whole, we have limited resources. Hence, we need to choose which goods or services we will provide to the market using the very limited resources that we have. In making this decision, we are guided by the prices that we receive in the market for providing a particular good or service. If it is profitable to provide a good or service at a particular price, then we will continue to provide it. And we may even increase the supply by making a further investment in increasing capacity. If it is not profitable, then we will cease the supply. Now let's look at the case of face masks. Let's assume that pre-COVID-19, the daily demand for face masks was around 40 million units. Various estimates show that the daily production capacity for face masks across the globe was also around 40 million units per day. And let's further assume that you can get a box of 100 surgical masks for $5. COVID-19 outbreak started in Wuhan, and then it quickly spread to the entire province of Hubei, of which Wuhan is the capital. Hubei itself has a population of 55 million. Assuming that one person needs one mask per day, the demand has increased to 55 million masks a day, whereas the global manufacturing capacity is just 40 million. In a few weeks, COVID-19 had spread to many of the parts of China, and there was also an outbreak in a lot of other countries as well. So in a matter of weeks, the demand for face masks has increased to 1.4 billion masks per day. In a matter of weeks, the demand has increased more than 35 times. So even in absence of any price gouging and profiteering, there is no way that the existing supply capacity can meet this demand. So it is natural for the prices to rise as the demand has increased manyfold, but the supply has not. As the virus outbreak extends to more countries, the demand keeps increasing, but there is no way that the supply can keep up with the demand. Unless people put up new facilities to manufacture masks and the raw materials required for the production. These capacities itself take time to build, even in normal times, and the task becomes even more difficult when there are lockdowns. Now that COVID-19 has spread almost across the entire globe, the daily demand for face masks can be estimated to be around 7 billion per day, which is the same as the total population of the earth. It will take years before the face mask production capacity can be ramped up to meet this demand. So, how do we solve this situation? There are only two ways to resolve the situation. First is to reduce the demand, and second is to increase the supply. Okay, so let's see what happens when a price control is imposed. Let's assume that government fixes the maximum price at $5 per 100 masks at the pre-COVID levels. At this price, the masks are affordable to a vast majority of world's population, so everyone will demand for it. This does nothing to reduce the demand for masks because as long as there's an outbreak, people will demand masks. Let's further assume that average cost of production for face masks is around $4.5 per 100 masks. This means that a manufacturer can make a profit of 10% on an average. The other way to solve the shortage of masks is to increase the supply. Now let's assume that all the existing manufacturers are working at full capacity. So we need other manufacturers to step in and increase the manufacturing capacity by setting up new production lines. As you can see, 10% is not a very attractive profit margin. And if a business already has other avenues where they can earn more than 10% profit, there's no incentive for them to enter the business of face mask production because the profit is not so great. Every business has limited resources and they want to maximize the value that they generate from them. Here we are assuming that cost of input like machinery and raw material do not change, okay, which is not true. The government has imposed the price control on the finished products, that is masks, but they have not imposed price controls on the inputs. Thus, with increasing demands for inputs, the price of inputs will increase, but the selling price cannot be increased, which will further squeeze the margins of the manufacturers. So we have a situation where new manufacturers are not entering the market and even the existing ones may shut down the production as their profits are getting squeezed due to the price control. This will only aggravate the existing supply situation. As we can see from this that imposing price control is counterproductive and it only increases the shortage of goods instead of alleviating the shortage. Malaysia has imposed a price control on masks. The domestic manufacturers in Malaysia have told the government that they will have to cease production of masks as the prices are too low compared to the cost of inputs, which have been rising. This confirms our theory that price controls are in fact detrimental and can worsen the shortage of essential commodities. Now let's see how things would have worked in a free market where there are no price controls. Let's assume that without government intervention, the price of masks increased 20 times to $100 per 100 masks. At this price, not a lot of people can afford the masks, so they try to economize by purchasing less of it. People try to go out less often, and if there are four people in a household, then only one of them may go out at a particular time. People try to find other substitutes like homemade masks. If the masks were still available at $5 per 100 masks, then people who may or may not need it will still demand it. A lot of people can actually avoid going out, but they will go out unnecessarily if they can manage to get an access to the face mask. Once prices are high, it acts to dampen the demand and prevents unnecessary use of masks. On the supply side, a price of $100 is attractive for a lot of producers. The profit margin is a phenomenal 95% of the selling price. This expectation of profit will attract a lot of new producers to the industry who will want to supply masks by adding new production capacity. As this capacity is added and masks are supplied, the supply will increase and the prices will start falling. We will of course not reach the pre-COVID price levels of $5 for 100 masks immediately, but it will be much lower than $100 for 100 masks. And of course, there will be less shortages and higher availability of masks. I can confirm this by my own personal experience here in Hong Kong. Pre-COVID, you could get a box of masks for 40 Hong Kong dollars. During the first 2 weeks of the outbreak, there was a high demand and masks were out of supply. For a week, most of the places were out of stock, and then slowly the masks started arriving, but the prices had increased tenfold to 400 Hong Kong dollars for a box. This incentivized a lot of businesses to source masks, and in the subsequent weeks, the masks were widely available almost everywhere. Initially, the prices were high, but very recently, the prices have come down to $100 per box, which is higher than the pre-COVID levels, but still it is much less than the peak prices of 400 Hong Kong dollars per box. But the other places where price controls have been imposed, the situation has not improved. The price controls seek to ensure availability of essential goods at affordable prices. There are two important elements here. First, availability, and second, affordable prices. With price controls, we only have affordable prices but not availability. Now that we know price controls are ineffective, then we must ask ourselves, why do governments still resort to it? Well, because it's the easiest thing for them to do. It helps them to show to the people that government is doing something about the situation. It is much more difficult to increase the supply than actually issue a price control order. Here again, two central fallacies that we spoke about earlier manifest themselves. Government is looking only at the immediate consequence of the price control and looking at it only from the perspective of consumer. Demand and supply situation are dynamic, and no government bureaucrat has the complete knowledge of demand and supply conditions required to efficiently set the prices because it is contained with millions of consumers and thousands of producers. When the government tries to substitute bureaucratic processes for free market mechanism, it almost always results in a disaster. I hope you found this video useful and it has helped you to increase your understanding of economics. Please share it with your friends who think that price controls are good and enlighten them. If you found this video intriguing and if you have some time, I would recommend you to read Economics in One Lesson. Do like and subscribe my channel for more such content and let me know in the comment section what you think of this video. Stay safe, wash your hands and use a mask if you need to go out. See you soon.